Hi there, and welcome to another episode of 411 Pop Culture, where real people talk about really everything. I'm Justin, this is Danielle, and tonight we're going to do another VC Andrews theory video, especially right after we just watched the Cutler series. Thanks for everybody that's been commenting and watching along with us. Now, we have quite a few theory videos still to come. Unfortunately, it's just hard with time. She's nonstop busy, I'm nonstop busy. This is something I would love to do all the time, but unfortunately we have to work and pay our bills and do all that too. Now, we've had we have a long list of items that we want to eventually cover that spanned all of VC Andrews novels, not just the Doppelganger and the Castiles, although I feel like that's where the bulk of the material comes from. This episode, though, in particular, is something that's near and dear to my heart. At least twice a year, I will do Google searches on various items from pop culture that I love. And one thing that I've always wanted to find is the Petals on the Wind script, the actual one written by, I guess, Mark David Perry, who wrote the script for the sequel to the 1987 film. According to Wikipedia, according to different sources, he's the one that wrote the script, and I still would like to find it. But anyway, I do Google searches, twice a year, trying to see if maybe it'll pop up. And it's all pop culture stuff, but usually it's like VC Andrews, like 87 film deleted scenes or something that I can find. Well, all the time when you Google Petals on the Wind, the script, the 2014 movie comes up all the time, and I really had no interest in reading the script. I figured, it came out so soon afterwards, I didn't think there would be any, bombshells in it or anything released from it that would be like, oh, can you believe this? I was wrong, so I ended up Googling it, and for whatever reason, I clicked on it, just, you never know. I'm like, well, maybe they wrote 2014, but this was going to be the 87 sequel. It wasn't. However, I noticed, it was written by Kayla Alpert, I think her name is, who did, I think, write the first, for the Flowers in the Attic Lifetime adaptation, and it said first draft, so I was like, okay, I'll see what anything did change from the Confrontation, because my thing with the movie is I wish the Confrontation had been expanded. And there has been so much in this that I was like, oh, I wish this had been added into the film. I think it would have made it such a better movie. That being said, there's also stuff that fans would have hated, I would have hated. So the ending would have been awful, I would have hated it, but it expanded on so much. The big things right off the bat that I loved was it gave finally for those of you that have watched some of our reviews, when we talk about the Doppelganger adaptations, one of my biggest things was they never ever mentioned in the released films that the reason the kids Corinne couldn't let them out of the attic was because of the grandfather's will. It wasn't said ever, and that always really bugged me. Well, the Petals on the Wind script addresses that issue. Now, they don't come right out and say specifically, a codicil was added to the will, and that's why myself, Corinne, I could not let the kids out. But it is, Corinne says it Bart, you knew my father's will, you drew it up, I couldn't have kids. Bart alludes to Kathy at one point, because their whole relationship is way more expanded, which you fans out there, I love, and I got stuff to say about it. But where he's even like, I can't have kids, I drew up this will with this legacy that took away me being able to have kids. So again, they never come out and say the grandfather's will, the details of it, but it's referenced enough that audiences that don't read VC Andrews novels could look at this and be like, oh, well, there's a reason now. Anyway, so we're going to get into it all. I just kind of rushed Danielle through it. She's meant to read the script, but you were having trouble downloading it. It was a weird thing, so we had to wait till we were together so she could actually read it, but I filled her in all the things. She read some of the big parts of the script so that we could get this film to you, because again, we have no time whatsoever. But as always, if you're enjoying what you're seeing, please comment below, please give us a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing. You all know watching YouTube videos now, it helps us, and I promise you it would help us a lot, so please subscribe. But do you want to just jump right into it? All right. So I'll try and go as chronologically as I can through the script, but I wrote these all down as fast as I could so I could get all my thoughts in. But one fun thing that they added, and it didn't end up going anywhere, but it sort of justifies the character of Sarah being added into it, was clearly Sarah is somebody who, her father's a doctor, she was a debutante, she had a cotillion, all that stuff. But one interesting thing that they were going to give to the character of Sarah was she was going to have a relationship with Corinne, which I thought was very interesting and would gives sort of a justification to like why they added Sarah into it. Again, they didn't end up going anywhere with it, but essentially when Christopher wants to go to see Kathy perform in the ballet, Sarah wanted Christopher to go to this party. Well, he's like, well, I got to go here. So she goes to the society party herself, and lo and behold, Corinne's there. Now, Sarah ends up like bumping into Corinne, and you get a flash of like Corinne's like evil side or like haughty side, and but then Sarah quickly like mellows the situation by being like, you're Corinne Winslow, I'm such a fan of you, I read all about you, you're wonderful. So then Corinne of course is appeased and is like, oh, okay, I guess you're okay. And she's even like, oh, when Corinne finds out that Sarah is marrying a doctor, not knowing it's her son, she's actually impressed and makes a comment along the lines of like, oh, I've always wanted to have a doctor in the family. And again, it's just such an interesting dynamic. Now, I wish that they had like gone somewhere with it. The farthest they go with it is that at one point Corinne gives Sarah like her business, I don't know, I wouldn't say a business card because Corinne's not really like a businesswoman, but like a card, and Christopher almost like finds it. Like there's a moment of tension where like in the script Chris is like reaching for the card and Sarah's like, oh no, that's mine. But it's almost like, oh, he almost discovers that his fiance has this relationship with his mother. So I thought it was a cool concept. But what did you think about that when you were reading it?
I didn't really care for it per se, but I will say, like, if it was in the adaptation, it would have added some suspenseful elements for those that haven't read the book. So I wasn't necessarily against it, but personally, I would not have liked that in there.
Sure. I wish if they had gone somewhere with it. Like, there was no payoff.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really needed. And again, the character of Sarah, is she really needed? These adaptations came out right during the, like, Christopher's Diary books were being released. So I think that they were really trying to give Christopher and Carrie, like, equal parts of the story. And again, cutting out... Now, in this script, Paul is still gone. That was clearly a decision they made right off the bat. And we'll get to where I'm going to try and go as chronologically as I can, but the way that this script ended, it does seem like there wasn't quite a plan yet to maybe do If There Be Thorns. So they wrap it up in a way that's to bring things full circle, and a lot of you are not going to like it. But again, in this script, it sort of justified Sarah's character being added because she was going to have this relationship with Corinne, which would sort of give Corinne's side of the story to some weight. It seems like, not that they recycled the dialogue, but they ended up doing that more with Corinne and Olivia. Because in this, Ellen Burstyn wouldn't have had barely anything to do. So it seems like they were sort of like, well, let's take the stuff we're giving to Sarah and kind of shift to Corinne. So I think that's what they were trying to do with that. Now, one thing, though, that I did also really like about the original script for this was the ballet was going to be a bigger part of it. It seemed like Kathy was they were still at the same level of success. Although one thing that shows up throughout the entire script, which I know you all would have loved, I know we would have loved, Kathy was in this script. Kathy, not just the sweet, innocent side that... And again, I thought Rose McIver did a wonderful job as Kathy. I really did. But she definitely, and it's not her, but the script that they went with, or the final product, was always kind of trying to show her in the best light. And Kathy is a fiery personality. Kathy is somebody who gets angry. And in this script, she gets angry a lot. There's parts where she goes off on Christopher, she goes off on Julian, she even goes off on Bart, which I think gives that relationship more weight because it's not just like trying to show the perfect side. And like the scene in the movie, they sort of hint at, where Julian decides to put glass in Yolanda's shoe. They leave it more ambiguous as to whether Kathy has any sort of like involvement. Well, in this script, now he doesn't do the glass thing, but she definitely, there's a plan and Kathy's in on it to kind of sabotage, because Yolanda gets the role. Julian decides to like keep dropping Yolanda, and that's how Kathy gets cast. And I like that. I like that, like, Kathy's more in on it, and you see that darker side. And again, I think they didn't want audiences to, like, resist their leading lady, but that's who Kathy is, the type of person who get revenge. Petals on the Wind's about revenge.
Well, in the books, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a point where, like, Julian kind of was like, I'm not going to dance with you anymore, but he couldn't actually dance with somebody else? because he
Correct.
danced with Kathy
That's
so
right.
much.
Yes, yes.
So I really love that part. It's like
Yeah.
a sweet revenge of
Yeah.
Kathy's in the books to be like, screw you, Julian.
Exactly, yeah. Yes, exactly. And I liked it, again, they had the ballet be a bigger part of it. In fact, there was one scene that I really, really wished, because I think when we were reading Petals on the Wind, the reason why I think we also wanted to see the successful side of Kathy is like that's also a part of her revenge.
Yes.
And we're thinking, okay, as we read it, the more Kathy gets success, the more of a chance there is that Corinne's going to be aware of Kathy's success. Well, in this, they actually pointed out, and there's a scene where, so Corinne's still having her, like, mild breakdowns. Again, they never, like, happen throughout this, just like they did it in the movie, but Bart alludes to them, just like he did in the released product. Well, he's all worried again about, at a certain point, about Corinne's mental state, and he sees her reading an article about Kathy as like being successful in Sleeping Beauty, and it's just a fun little moment. Now he's sort of like, hey, well maybe you want to add a little more culture in our life? Let's go see this. And Corinne's definitely like, I never liked ballet, and like puts it down very Corinne like. But it was such a cool little moment in this script that had her seeing Kathy's success.
And I love that too, because I know what I really wanted to see, and I'm sure I commented on our review, was that like I wanted to see more of the dancing.
Yes, yes.
And I think this script really gave us at least part of that. You know, maybe we couldn't have got the big dance thing and seeing that success, but at least seeing like the news article alludes to that.
Yes,
so I would have loved to have had that included.
And it works that if they were going to set it at this time period, again, at this time they were sort of like, well, Kathy can't be that successful yet. But exactly what you just said, it gives us still what we want from the dancing, which is Corinne might see it. We know Corinne saw it in this scene. Yeah. So that was a like fun little moment from the script that I totally loved. Another thing, too, was the owl on the roof thing still happens. But now I know we kind of skipped through this part, but so what happens is Carrie is still having issues with those girls at school, but instead of it being this thing about the dolls, which was a part of the book, Carrie really loved those little dolls.
Yeah.
In this, what happens is it's very much a V.C. Andrews from like Heaven experience, or even Ruby, where she's at a dance and this boy like comes up to her and is like, you're so beautiful, your eyes, and you know, it's almost like romantic for a moment, but it ends up being a total setup. This boy is like, come on, let's go up on the roof, let's get away from this, I want to get to know you. And so Carrie, being sweet and innocent, is sort of like, okay. So they go up on the roof. Well, it ends up being a total trick. The mean girls, Lacey St. John and all them, they end up locking her up there. So it happens the same, it ends the same, but it's a little bit of a different thing, which, again, I think I would have been fine with it. It's sort of how the release movie was, just having that essence of it, and that's what we always say about it, at least for me, having the essence of there's going to be a scene where Carrie ends up on a roof trapped. That's all I needed, but...
Well, first I wanted to comment alluding to the movie Carrie, where a cute boy asks Carrie to the prom. It's kind of like similar.
Yeah, sure.
So I just thought of that as you were describing
it.
But for me,
no telekinesis involved
here. No pig's blood.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking when you were just describing the scene, because again I didn't get a chance to read this one, but Carrie was just, even her relationship with Alex, like she was very hesitant, like a boy could like me. I just don't think that would have worked, because I don't think she would have been like, oh no, I'm not going to the roof with you. Like she was very but the dolls like still bring out that childness in her. So I prefer the dolls. I definitely prefer the dolls.
I do too. I think for me, as long as there would have been a scene that involved her on the roof, I would be excited. But now that you say that, I think I prefer than what was released. Yeah, I agree too. But the script did have a different take on it, that they ended up going more towards how it ended up being. But I think you're right. I think it was right that they changed that. So, agreed. Yeah. So, the rest of what we're going to talk about, though, with this script really is about the ending, the confrontation. But I just want to emphasize again, and again, so much happens with that, so I apologize if it comes out kind of like jumbled and mixed up. But it's all about the ending. But I did want to emphasize again that one thing I really did love about this script, and I feel like it solved a lot of problems, was Kathy. We've already said it, but like there was a moment. Now again, I don't know that I would ever believe that she would slap Christopher, but there is a moment where she even slaps Christopher with Julian, when Julian first comes across like, hey lady, like trying to hit on her, trying to get her. She sort of like shuts him down and sort of like, well, who are you, you know? And Yolanda, especially, she kind of, Yolanda's snarky to her at first, and I forget what the line is exactly, but then, like, when Kathy gets her sort of revenge on Yolanda, she gives it right back to Yolanda the same line, and that's the stuff that I was missing. But particularly as we get into it, the Bart stuff, where she even gives it back to Bart. Like, she shows her, like, not her nasty side, but definitely, like, I'm stewing and annoyed and mad Kathy. But you said something we were reading it, and so I'm going to jump back again about the slapping of Christopher. Yeah. So why she slaps Christopher is it's during the scene where Christopher goes to see Kathy performing. Yolanda is making sort of comments in Christopher's ear about, like, oh, yeah, Julian really loves your sister. Maybe both of them are hinting at something. So Christopher goes off and catches them. Well, at this point, he's basically telling Kathy, like, this happened. I saw it. And Kathy's like, I don't believe it. He's like, well, you only care about success. You're more like our mother. You're just like our mother like that. So she smacks him. Now, again, I don't think she would ever slap him. I think she would definitely give him an earful. But you said...
Oh, 100% she would have slapped him. No doubt in my mind. The whole point of Petals on the Wind is her revenge against her mother. And the fact that Chris would go so low and say she was acting like that, I mean, her natural reaction, especially, like, with being with, like, an abusive man, Julian, just all this frustration, it probably just, like, came out at Christopher, and she knows Christopher's not going to hurt her back, you know? And I hate to say it, but Chris was a punching bag for a long time for her. She was very, very mad and angry, so I think it would have come out like that, 100%.
I can see it. I don't know if I think she would ever get to the point of slapping, but I could see it. So we're 50-50 on this, but it's like I don't disagree with it. It's hard for me. But I do love that, again, at least it would have shown her side.
Yes.
And the stuff with Julian, he is more violent with her. Like, it's kind of cut a little differently. And that's the thing about this script. You can see the finished movie in this script, but it seems like they kind of put things in and then switched them around and gave it to, like, this character and stuff. Because, again, like, Ellen Burstyn wouldn't have anything to do, so they kind of swapped that. But a lot of this comes out in what I loved about this script, and I think it's probably the reason why I was like, well, let me see what they were going to do with it. The relationship between Bart and Kathy.
And we're in agreement with this.
Yeah, and it's so clear that they were going to have it be... Kathy loves Bart. So we have our episode about Kathy's true love, and I know that there's a significant amount of you out there that loves that believes that Christopher is Kathy's true love. Now, where I think we ended on our episode was that we think that Kathy is Christopher's true love.
Yes.
But I think that Bart was Kathy's true love.
I agree.
And I think that comes out in the novel. I mean, in Petals on the Wind, the things that make me think this are right from the novel, from the source material. You know, Petals on the Wind, page 429. Kathy says about Bart, he was looking straight at me and through me, gone on to where I could never reach him and confess that I loved him from the start, 15 years ago. Page 430. It was my final salute, the final one to Bartholomew Winslow, whom I'd first seen at age 12. On first sight, I'd given my heart to him. So much so that I had to have Paul grow a mustache so he'd look more like Bart. And I'd married Julian because his eyes were dark, dark like Bart's. Oh God, how could I live with the knowledge that I had killed the one man I'd loved best? So, you know, I get it, why people want to think Christopher is Kathy's true love. But there it is. I think that says it all. But the thing is, even when reading it, I remember being like, I loved that Kathy had fallen in love with Bart. And I don't have the quote here, but there's also a line where she says, without meaning to let it happen, I'd fallen madly, idiotically in love with him. It is, I have quoted the page number in one of the comments below, but you can all go digging for it.
Or just read it again.
Read it again, right. Because it's my favorite part of Petals on the Wind.
Oh,
I'll never forget the chill I got with it. Yes.
Yes, I love the Bart Kathy romance.
Good. It's so good. So in this script, what I loved about it was that there's no doubt, and it kind of affects a lot of Christopher, the romance. Now, we're going to get into it. They make a big change when it comes to Jory. I guess we'll get into it now, but we'll clear it up at the end. But they remove the character of Jory from this, and they were going to set it up. Now, I think that it's because they weren't sure if they were going to continue on with If There Be Thorns and all of that. Even still, I don't know that they should have done this, but I think what they wanted to accomplish was a sort of full circle. So what they were going to have happen is Kathy was pregnant with twins by Bart, meaning that, but not having Jory and Bart Jr., she was going to have the Carrie and Kathy, sort of what like Jory's kids ends up being.
Yeah, they were going to do the
Deidre and
Corey.
Darren
Yeah.
ended up being like Carrie and Corey again. Well, they were going to kind of, have it.
Yeah, it was, okay, so when you read the script, it's like, it's almost like you got punched in the gut because you're like, you cannot remove Jory.
Right.
Like, you
right.
can't.
You
and, like,
can't.
the whole rest of the series, like, If There Be Thorns, Seeds of Yesterday, all of that, like, it's about the juxtaposition of those two brothers. Like,
Yes.
Jory the do-gooder and, like, the dancer and the, you know, all this. And then you've got Bart, you know, it's, I literally was like, cringe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I can't. It was terrible.
It's so true. And I think, though, and the reason I wanted to get to this point first before we get more into the Bart stuff is because it changed the timeline. And I think that one of the criticisms I've had, too, with the Lifetime adaptations in our review was that for silly reasons, it seemed like they didn't change the time.
Yeah.
For instance, Kathy gets in the accident with Julian, and then it's a few months later, and Jory's been born, and she's teaching the kids. So that scene's still in there, but it's without Jory. However, I feel like when they were like, they got their senses, and they were like, wait, we need to have Jory, either because they were going to continue the series or what, they're like, we gotta have Jory. They just kind of inserted him into that scene at the dance studio. However, it changes, it's one of those things where you're like, well, why not just make it 2 years later? Instead, they very clearly say it's just been a few months, so she's had Jory, but he's basically a newborn, and she's teaching dancing and doing all this stuff, and it's like, you're sort of like, well, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of, but it also screws up the ages, and so I remember when us doing our If There Be Thorns episode, we were like, well, it seems like they kind of righted the ages a little bit, but at this point, you know, according to the released Petals on the Wind, they'd really only be about a year apart, Bart and Jory, maybe 2 years tops. But again, if they fixed this, so it seems like they went back in and they were like, well, we need to just put Jory in here and here and here, because when you read the script, he's not in it at all. So anyway, what this leads to is with Bart, you know, there's a scene where Kathy's sort of like alluding, oh, I don't have kids either, which threw me off because I actually started reading this script towards the end because I just wanted to see if the confrontation was any different. And she was sort of talking about how she doesn't have kids, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, you'd have Jory right now. So I was totally confused reading it at first. So that's what made me start over again and realize, oh, this changes everything. But anyway, so she's talking with Bart about how she would love to have twins. So when the reveal happens that she's pregnant at the confrontation, she basically tells Bart, you know, I'm pregnant with your twins. And again, I know you all would have hated that, but put that to the side for the moment.
I did hate it too.
No, and I hated it too. No, I hated it. I think they did it because they didn't know if they were going to continue on. They wanted to kind of bring it full circle. But anyway, so she tells Bart this. But what's great about it is, so backing up a little, in the released version, when Kathy's pregnant, she ends up telling Christopher, and that's when they start making out. Sarah catches him. That all still happens. But he's basically like, let's move to California, have a life. It's sort of left, Kathy doesn't really answer him in the released script, in the released movie, but in the script, she's very much like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to live a lie. And so at the confrontation, she still does the same stuff, but even more is like given to the confrontation. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but it's definitely more. And the thing that bothered me more than anything from the Lifetime adaptations was that it was never made clear why Corinne couldn't just let the kids out after the grandfather died, and that's obviously because of the codicil added to the grandfather's will. So this script would have solved all those problems.
Well, I want to make one quick comment before we go into that, because that's a whole other thing.
Sure, for sure.
Also, I think in the book, so we're not the movie or the script, but the book, Kathy doesn't want to leave with Chris anyway because she still needs to get her revenge.
She still needs to get her revenge, too.
Right.
Yes.
So I don't want to forget about that either.
Sure. No, I think that totally makes sense. So we get to the confrontation. You know, the thing that's interesting, too, with Bart and her relationship. So now the codicil's been added, but so they're talking about having kids, and he alludes to the fact, like, oh, the reason I can't have kids, you know, I drew up the legacy that led to this.
Yeah.
So again, it's never exactly stated like, oh, Corinne cannot have kids because of what was added to the codicil. But even at the confrontation, Corinne's like, you drew up the will, you know why we couldn't have kids, da-da-da. So it's all there, enough that like any viewer watching it would have been like, oh, okay, that must have had something to do with this. And when they read the novel, they'll get it. But it's also a part of why I bring that up with the Bart stuff, is because it shows how much more in depth they gave more attention to the Bart and Kathy relationship. And she does, there's a part where she even snaps back at him. In this, it's all like she's like, the perfect Kathy with him. And in the book, she's not. She goes off on him all the time. Or, like, she admits she's jealous that she's not going to the party. She admits, like, Corinne just uses you. That's the only reason, and you just keep falling for it. So stuff that, like, again, is Kathy, and again, emphasizes the relationship with Bart.
Agreed. I mean, I think, like, just reading that, like, it's so much more like the book, because she did play that cat and mouse with him for a long time, and she didn't hide her feelings about how she felt about his wife. So you really see that come out in this script, which I loved.
I loved it, too. In fact, there's a chapter called Tiger by the Tail in Petals on the Wind, which just made me think of that. Yeah, because it's basically a cat and mouse game for both of them. And, yeah, she is very honest, like, you're just used by this woman, like you're just a plaything. And they don't come around and say that, but essentially that's what this script does. So at the confrontation, and you can see again where they kind of change some dialogue. One thing that I love that happens right before the Christmas party, though, too, was, so again, Corinne does not, they don't reveal the whole Corey, she locked him up in the attic thing, or just left him there, which I did love that about this adaptation, that they decided to clarify, like, he was left in a trunk. And, I mean, it's horrible. Don't get me wrong. What were you saying?
Well, I didn't really care for that part.
Oh, see, I loved it because it was definitely like, they're choosing the little... In the book, it's hinted at, but they don't come around and say it. I liked that this adaptation was like, well, that's what we're choosing. I think that was really cool. But they don't... In this, it's upsetting because you never find out Corey's fate. And the whole rest of the script, Christopher was like searching medical records, trying to find like any proof that Corinne actually was a good mother. He really doesn't want to believe. So that becomes part of his reveal, which we'll get into. But going back to the confrontation, they changed some dialogue, but essentially it's the same as what we got in the movie, except it's very clear that Kathy loves Bart. And Kayla Alpert, I think her name is, who wrote this script, clearly had the same we were reading when we felt it. And, like for the moment when she's like, when Kathy's sort of to Bart, in the book, or in the released adaptation, Bart's sort of like, you just used me, you did this for this. And she responds, I do care for you. In this script, we did not like that. Right, agreed, because I'm like, no, she does more than care for him.
Yeah.
In this script, that same sequence is in there, but instead she's like, it started out that way, I'll admit it, but I know you might not believe me, but it's changed. I love you. I feel for you. I know you could never believe that. I'm ashamed of what I've done. I mean, it goes on and on.
It's a wonderfully written scene.
Yeah, I was beautifully written. Yes. Everything I wanted in this in the confrontation. Because there is more with Corinne, too. She is going on about, like, Bart, the reason why we can't have kids. You drew up my father's will. He would never have forgiven me because she's trying to explain when she admits that these are her kids. Which, again, I would have loved even that,
Yes.
Not only because it reveals why, because of the grandfather's will, but also because it gives more to the confrontation. Yeah. Like, there's so much you want to happen, which they really pushed down into about a minute and a half confrontation.
And we didn't like that.
Screen. No, that's what you live for, this is the whole reason to read Petals on the Wind, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the whole book.
Yeah. So in this, Kathy's like, she is saying, I love you. If you don't, I totally understand. I wouldn't love somebody that could do this to me. And he's basically like, are you really pregnant with my children? And he, again, the twins, which is so wrong. But he's basically like, oh, I do love you and I want to be with you too. And I just thought that was so amazing.
Well, I mean, we have to remember too, in the book, she was pregnant with Bart.
Right,
Jr.,
exactly.
And I love, when you read this script, it reminds you of like why she named her child Bart Jr. Mm-hmm. Like that shows that she really loved him.
Absolutely. And I think that's why she had such a tumultuous relationship with her son, is because with what happened with Bart, she felt such guilt for. She never wanted to hurt her son like that. Unfortunately, that is exactly what hurts her son, the distance she keeps, because she feels so terrible. She keeps her distance because she loves him, but that's what makes him the way he is.
Well, and then so you've got this wonderful scene with Bart and Kathy, and then this Corinne and Christopher thing,
which was crazy because but here's what I loved about it too. When Kathy's saying this the first part. It kind of cuts back between them, but the first part, Kathy says to Bart in front of Christopher and Corinne, I'm going to be the mother of your children, and I love you. Like, you're the one I want to be with. So Christopher is devastated, and I think that it gives such a more interesting layer to Christopher, too. So he goes, like, storming off. In the released version, you know, Corinne runs off. She ends up going up to see Olivia. They have their moment, which I love, because, again, it includes the Corey stuff, all this great stuff. But the thing is, and what's different about this, and I think I forgot to say this earlier, was Corinne has the one thing that Olivia's been obsessed with is obituaries. So instead of doing the whole Corey thing, right before the Christmas party, what Olivia does is Corinne says something like, you're always interested in an old woman who's just looking at obituaries all day. Well, Olivia's sort of like, well, here's one I think you'll be interested in, and it's Carrie's obituary. I loved that. I thought that'd be interesting. I love it too. Because you get to see that Corinne knows now what happened to Carrie. If you think of the movie, she never finds out that what she did. Now, in this movie, the difference or in this script, Carrie had just called Corinne. I love that the release adaptation had an actual scene with them together.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that was the right choice, and that was what was needed. But in this, she does find out, at least there's repercussions, there's a consequence. So that's why when Corinne gets to the Christmas party, she's a little bit more upset, a little bit off. But anyway, so Christopher runs up to the attic, and he's upset now, too. Like, he's freaking out. He starts ripping things like the old snail and all this stuff down from the attic because I think, his love for Kathy, he realizes it's just one-sided. It all goes back to this attic. So that's when Corinne comes up, and she's all like, we can run away together, and she's all messed up and stuff. But
she thinks it's Chris Sr.
Exactly. Like how she does, like how they did it. And that's what I was saying. They kind of switched things around a little bit. And I think they did it because they decided to be like, wait, we think people are going to want Kathy to be with Christopher. And based on the comments that I've received from a lot of you, and I love you all, I think a lot of you have read it as like, it's a love story between Kathy and Christopher. And I think it is, but it's because Kathy is Christopher's true love. Yeah. So, what did you think about these changes?
I mean, when I read the books when I was younger, I always wanted Kathy to be with Chris. When I read them as an adult, I wanted her to be with Bart.
Sure.
And it was like devastating watching this fire scene. So, in the script, when they're up in the attic and Corinne's losing her mind, she thinks she's talking to Chris Sr. And then Chris is kind of like, whoa, like what's going on? And then she lights a candle, and then the attic starts going up in flames. Yeah. So, like, originally, like, in the book, we always think that Corinne goes up there and starts the fire.
Right.
And I think that's the same conclusion we come to in the adaptation as well.
Sure.
Right.
But we will say we do have a theory episode coming on about that fire eventually. Yes, we do have a lot coming, I promise. This one just had to take precedence because it's a topic near and dear to us, is the Petals on the Wind.
Absolutely. But, so, the fire starts in the attic, and Chris grabs Corinne, they run down, and they're not really outside yet, because I feel like, in my mind, they're already all outside, and then Corinne yells, my mother's still in there, and that's what prompts Bart to run in there.
Correct.
But in this script, it's different a little bit, if you want to go into that.
Well, essentially, it plays out how it does now from this point in how it's released, where, Christopher, I think, carries Corinne down. Bart realizes Olivia's up there. She runs back up there. So it ends there the same, and then we go into this different ending, which is exactly the same, except for Jory and Bart. It's a junior Carrie and Corey, because Kathy had twins, which is ridiculous. And they're, I get it. You hate it. I know it. We hate it too. But so much else to the script I love. And for me, a big part of it was just the final, there was somebody who was like, hey, we got to mention something about the grandfather's will somewhere here, and they did in this script, and I loved it. And also the fact that Bart's the love of Bart and Kathy.
I think those are our favorite two things. Like, so it's the information about the will, the true love for Bart.
Yeah.
I think those are our top two.
And it was great because the relationship with Bart and Kathy is that like they focus more on that. Like the second half of the script, it's almost by that time that Kathy's with Bart, and you see, in the release version, it's really she goes to the office, he comes over, they kind of get at it, then there's a scene where they're together, and then it's not again until the confrontation. There's more to it with this. In fact, there's a scene where Kathy like stalks Corinne, so there's a scene where Kathy's all like, I'm jealous that I'm not going, I'm jealous that you're leaving now to go be with your wife, and which is so Kathy. So she follows Bart to this party, and she's like spying on Corinne and getting all jealous because she's like, he really does love her, and da-da-da. And it's great because it shows you how much Kathy is feeling, but it's also Kathy. And I think that's the best thing about this script, too, is that it's Kathy. It's the Kathy you know and love. It's the Kathy we know and love.
Kathy the smart mouth.
Yes, and it's repetitive.
But we love her.
And it's interesting when you read the script, knowing the adaptation, how you see where they kind of just tweak things around, like, oh wait, we are going to continue on, so we definitely Jory, so they pluck him in. But again, it also shows why the timeline is off, and they didn't think like, oh, we probably should. Again, it's simple stuff when you're watching it. You're like, why can't they just say it's been 2 years since the accident, and that makes Jory the right age?
Well,
stuff like that.
I mean,
you know,
you can't mess with perfection. I mean, in the books, you know, when Jory ends up having twins, Darren and Deidre, whatever, like that's how it should be.
Exactly.
This again, the ending of this script with the twins and then naming them Corey and Carrie is just a little. What do you always say, macabre?
Sure, yeah, it is.
Just
It's a
feels
little
like,
cringy.
I don't.
Because again, they wanted to give a full circle of like Chris and Kathy have a reunite, like are sort of reunited with Carrie and Corey, and the whole apple pie line. Like I said, it virtually ends the same way. Instead of though Jory and Bart, it's Carrie and Corey, which is very macabre.
Yeah.
And I think I said this, but I just want to make sure I say it real quick. Again, the one thing that they took out too was that they didn't really give the reveal of Corey. I loved that they chose to, like, okay, it's like what we talked about in our theory video, what happened to Corey. And I know a lot of you like to always kind of comment to me about the secret brother. In that episode, we know secret brother exists. We know in that timeline Corey's alive. Personally, I don't believe in that timeline. One, I think only Virginia Andrews can make a change like that. And two, I find it very hard to believe that Corinne is willing to admit to Kathy and everybody, oh, I threw Corey in a ravine, or oh, I left him in a room, or oh, I poisoned her with arsenic. But she's not willing to admit that she abandoned Corey alive and healthy at a hospital. I just find that very hard to believe. So we know about Secret Brother, I promise.
Yes, and I never liked the reveal of Corey's body. I liked in the book where Kathy alludes to a smell. Yeah. I think that makes perfect sense. Sure. I'm fine with that.
And I respect that, but I respected that the adaptation decided to go ahead and be like, they read between the lines, so that makes me think these are fans that were writing this one, and they decided to go ahead and go for it. And I respected that. So I was missing that, like, there's nothing really said to Corey, because the rest of the book, I think I did say I was going to say this, Christopher is the one who the rest of this script has been, like, calling different doctors, calling different things, trying to find out what happened to Corey, and I think it's because he struggled with trying to believe that his mother could do this to them. So that's part of the confrontation, is he's sort of like, I know you're lying, because she's like, the doctor said he had pneumonia, and he's like, I know you're lying. I've called 3 states worth of, and nobody has a record of this. So anyway, it just shows what it could have been. I think it was worth the read. It's literally, if you Google Petals on the Wind script, it's the first one that comes up. I'm so grateful that I read it. Like, I still would love to get the Mark David Perry script, that's like the 1987 script, because there's so much about it. I want to know how they would have worked around Corinne not being there. So if ever that happens, I hope. But I'm so glad that I took the time, and this is just such a lesson. Like, never just assume something. Don't skip over it. There was a lot about this that I love, because I feel like it corrected a lot of when we did our review. You know, it mentioned the grandfather's will. Again, not specifically, but enough that you would have been satisfied. It shows our Kathy. Our Kathy's alive and well, and I would have loved to have seen Rose McIver perform this side of Kathy as well, because I think she could. It had the ballet. It had Bart. It was clearly who Kathy loved. And you could see right how they switched it around, where they're like, no, we should probably make it Christopher. And I love that you see the devastated Christopher, because he was devastated a lot in Petals on the Wind.
He was.
But again...
and I will add, too, like, I don't think I've ever read a script, but reading it come alive again, like, I would totally recommend looking it up. It just brings you right back into it, and just to get another version, it's just, for us fans, it was wonderful. I'm so glad you found it.
Me too, and I'm glad that you read it. I'm glad we got to talk about it. I'm sorry if this got so jumbled. It was like just so many thoughts that we wanted to get down at once, but let us know what you think. Would you have liked some of these changes? Are you glad with how, I've really come to love the Petals on the Wind movie that we have. No, it's not perfect. No, it's not the best thing ever, but it's better than nothing. And I think that they did, and it's better than that. I think they did a lot right with it, considering they did it so fast and so quick. I would love a real version of Petals on the Wind, but I'm glad I have it. But I'm also glad now that I found this script, because it feels like, okay, they were planning to do a better movie, still with some mistakes like the ending and stuff, but overall it made more sense. What did you all think about it? Please comment below. Please give us the thumbs up. Please consider subscribing, and we'll have some more theory videos for you as soon as we can. Have a good one. Attachment to Chris, but she really knows she's not in love with him. I'm not adding any of that. So
thank God, I was like, do not gesture towards me.
I wasn't gesturing towards you.
You made a lie.
No, like women versus men.
I know,
just,
you're like,
because, no, that's in your head. I was just saying women versus men.
Well, you know what? It's recorded, so you can go back and watch the face you made.
Okay,
Anyway.
sure. I probably made a face because you were doing something, and I'm like, what are you doing? Anyway, so 3, 2, 1.
I have no idea. Oh, the revenge. She still wanted to have revenge with her mom.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Totally agree with that. But going back on to... that's all I'm going to say to it. That's all I'm going to say. All right, I just want you to be ready. Okay. Well...
What is wrong with you right now?
Okay, ready?
Okay.
3,
I've been ready.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Totally. No, I totally think that's true. So, you got to laugh, Danielle. I mean, if you're going to laugh, you can't laugh.
Okay, stop. Get out of here. Okay.
It is getting hot in here, too. That's why I'm like, can we get this done already?
Start talking!
You're like this. Like, trying to hold your laugh in. How can I keep talking?
They know how we are. They don't care. Okay, I'm going to try not to laugh.
3... Alright. 3, 2, 1. No, I think that totally makes sense.
John Amos